This is a trigger warning. Please be advised that the following content will contain descriptions of sexual assault, physical abuse, and domestic violence. If you are currently experiencing sexual assault, please call the hotline at 1-800-656-4673. And or if you are experiencing domestic violence, please call the hotline at 1-800-799-7233. My name is Ruth Adisu, and in 2018, I had the pleasure of speaking with Keena Hildebrand. She's a marital rape survivor and a speaker for RAIN. Here's her story. That intro, please, again, one more time.
Sure. My name is Keena Hildebrand. I am a speaker for the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. I am currently a political science student. I'm looking to be in law school 2020. Married, I have soon-to-be 3 children. My third is due in December. And basically what I do is I kind of go around to different areas that request a sexual assault speaker, and I talk about my story, which is about mostly marital rape, and then also conceiving a child via rape and how that impacts me and certain things of that nature. My first husband and I, we met through the Navy. I was stationed in San Diego going through training, and he was also there, so we just kind of met and hit it off right from the start.
And how long was it until you guys got married?
So this is going to sound crazy, but it was 8 months. So everything that people tell you about moving quickly is totally true, but in the Navy, things kind of go a little bit quicker because you're separated from your family and you don't really have any kind of support system, so you see a lot of people in the military getting together pretty quickly, and that's just kind of my theory on it.
Were there any, signs before the abuse began?
Yes. Of course, at the time, they didn't seem like big things, but even from the beginning, with things moving so quickly, there were a lot of things that he would do, that just kind of gave you this weird feeling, almost that he was doing things for how they looked versus how they were, if that makes sense. And then when we were separated for a brief period where he was actually stationed in San Diego and I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. And when he flew back, it was almost like picking up a completely different person. From the time that he moved in with me, I was still pregnant. He would do things kind of like hold me down if we got into a fight when I wanted to walk out. And, of course, he would say stuff like, this isn't a great neighborhood and I don't want you to walk by yourself. But it would progress to the point to where he would actually, sometimes, be yelling so profusely that he would spit on me and things like that. And, again, at that point, I was kind of thinking, I'm pregnant. I'm probably pushing it too far. And looking back, that sounds silly, but in my mind, it kind of made sense.
So the red flags, you'd say, are just some more verbally aggressive, being verbally aggressive?
And it even progressed to the point to where at one point we were watching a friend's dog, and I very strongly believe that he ended up murdering that dog. We were sleeping and the dog was crying, and then all of a sudden the dog was bleeding out of its mouth, and I got up out of bed and we went to take the dog to the vet, and it ended up dying in the car. It kind of seems odd, but the theatrics that my husband at the time was kind of going through, they just seemed extremely forced, and I think that's when I realized that that's when I needed to get out.
What didn't let you leave?
I think a lot of it was we're so pushed as kind of young people that we make these fickle decisions, and we're almost kind of shamed when we try to leave marriages now. We always see people just get divorced so easy. So, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of shame in the idea that I was going to be one of those people who got married and divorced really quick. And then a lot of it, too, was, we had gotten pregnant, so I was going to be a mother and have this child, and there was a lot of concern about even just putting food on the table at that point, making sure that I was doing what was right, not only for me, but for my child. And at that point, I just kept telling myself, I don't have any solid proof yet that there's something really wrong. And, of course, I never thought that it would get physical with me until it did.
Could you, walk us through that time when it became physical?
Absolutely. So I had just had my son a couple weeks earlier, and I don't remember what we were fighting about, but at some point he ended up, the very first part of him being physical is he pushed me onto a vacuum cleaner kind of in a corner. So I ended up falling. And again, I had just had a baby. So and then when that happened, I kind of thought, okay, well, this is going to stop the whole argument. And of course it didn't. He actually got on top of me and continued to yell at me. When I finally was able to get up, I don't remember what I said, but I said something that upset him. And he charged at me to the point where I literally grabbed my son and I locked me and him in the bathroom. And at that point, I honestly thought I was going to die because just how he was acting, it just wasn't anything that I had ever seen before. And at that point, I did call the cops, and he ended up leaving because he heard the phone call. So that was my first and last time filing a police report as well.
And you said that was your last time you filed a police report?
Yes. When the police officer, so they took, 3 of them came and took the report, and then 1 came back to bring me the report. And at that point, my husband had came back and taken my oldest son from me and was holding my son on the couch. And I had requested, what do they call them? The protective order.
Yep.
And so the police officer actually handed me and handed Seth the protective order and then left while the baby was still in my ex-husband's hands. So at that point, I realized that was just making him more upset. So,
are there any other encounters where it escalated?
I think that was the one that made me realize I needed to leave.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I started making the moves. My parents lived in Missouri, and at the time we were in Norfolk. So I actually called my parents and asked them to move out with me, trying to help make myself a little bit more financially secure and able to go through the things that I needed to in order to support my family when I left him. And unfortunately, part of that was going through the legal process, which included getting paperwork, which is what he found the night that the sexual assault started occurring. What had happened is my parents were living with me at the time, and we were in a 2-bedroom apartment. So it was my parents in 1 bedroom, and then myself, my ex-husband, and my 6-month-old son in the bedroom with us. And it was towards the end of the night, and he had been acting kind of strange during the night, but I didn't really think anything of it. He used to get mad at me quite a bit, and so I was just kind of waiting for him to tell me what it was because I knew he was going to. So finally, when we're getting ready for bed, he asked me about the papers, and I kind of denied them, and then I was like, well, I was just looking into it because we've been fighting so much, and hoping that he wouldn't take it very seriously, and he did. At that point, we were both laying down in bed, and I thought the argument was kind of over. He just stopped talking, and then all of a sudden he started trying to engage in sexual activities with me, rubbing my side, and just kind of trying to kiss on my neck and stuff. And I pushed him off, and I was like, do you really think that this is what's going to happen after we just fought?
Mm-hmm.
And he just continued to do it. And then finally I pushed him, and I was like, you need to stop. And he told me that I could either be loud and wake he told me that if I was loud and I woke up my son, what kind of mother would I be to make my son watch that? And I struggled quietly after that, not as hard as I was before, because I was almost shocked that came out of somebody's mouth.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, while it was going on, I just kind of found a spot on the wall and stared, because at some point I knew that it wasn't going to stop. And then that continued. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
That continued every night for about a month and a half. And after a while, I just stopped fighting at all. I would just kind of lay there and find my spot on the wall and stare at it. My parents were there, but my dad had just had a heart attack the year prior, and my husband was an MMA instructor.
Oh, wow.
So, my parents, I didn't think that they were going to help me any more than, I don't know, I thought I was protecting everyone at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't something until, afterwards that I realized, I could have amended my plan. But at that point, I felt like, I had this plan, I had this path to escape, and I just needed to suck it up and deal with it until I could get out. And then, unfortunately, that's when I found out I was pregnant. That month was more of like just this incredible shame that I felt, because I really see myself as a strong woman. So after everything that, when you think of somebody who stays in a marriage like that, you don't think of a strong person. So there was a lot of shame in that, and in me kind of feeling like I had lost some portion of myself, or at least who I thought I was, because I wasn't strong anymore. There was quite a while in my pregnancy where I hated myself for being pregnant. And I would literally look in the mirror and cry from the moment that I put my toddler to bed till I could go to sleep. I was struggling with PTSD at the time, so it wasn't very much. But I would literally look in the mirror and sob and beg myself to stop crying because I didn't want my toddler to hear me. But going from that to where I am now, and the comfort and being able to share my story, that has altered my definition of strength to the core.
And yeah, that's just a theory of my own, is that one of the reasons people in situations not only like this, but in just any situation that may cause someone to become vulnerable in telling their truth, is that this definition of strength that society has built around showing no emotion and things like that. Do you think just education on having more emotional intelligence, or sex education in general, would help situations like this from occurring?
Oh, yeah. I think that the whole way that we view domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims in general, we tend to see somebody. And even when we say victim, there's a stigma with victim. You'll notice that with people who, and I kind of use the word victim and survivor interchangeably, but you'll notice that like among different communities, instead of saying victim, they'll say survivor, because there is a shame that comes with saying I was a victim. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there really shouldn't be that shame. There shouldn't be oh, you were a victim, because the thing is, that's something that you lived through. And I don't know, the way that I see it is, while I was a victim, and honestly, I struggle with PTSD, I'm a victim every day, but I wake up every morning and I tell my story every day. I help who I can. I, come back home and I raise my boys and I go to school, and I live through what happened to me every single day. And I think that, changing the definition of victim is just important in general. And then also definitely sex education. There are so many times after becoming an advocate and finding out all of these things about coercion and the things that we really don't think of as problematic. I think so many girls, and probably boys too, we just don't think about those things being so negative. And I think if we just started some kind of real sexual education in high school or even in middle school, it would just be fundamental.
Getting to the point you are now, I'm pretty sure that took a lot of willpower, a lot of patience. And after that month, what made it stop? Was it you? Was it a circumstance? And how did you go about that?
Well, after that month, when I found out I was pregnant, he actually stopped on his own.
Okay.
And actually, after becoming pregnant again, this kind of goes back into falling into societal norms, or at least trying to fit in. I actually stayed for a couple months after that. I chose to try and work things out through counseling. And within that, he actually ended up burning my oldest son in the bathtub. And at that point, when I realized that I wasn't just the only victim at that point, when I realized that this is something that could affect my children and did affect my children. And of course, I see how it affected them emotionally, particularly my oldest now. But at that point, I didn't see it. But him actually being physically burned by my ex-husband was the day that he moved out. I don't know, there's some truth about the waking mama bear thing, because it was almost like, he had done what he did to me and I could bear it, but the minute that it became something to do with my child, I was like out in the front yard throwing his stuff out, and again, my ex-husband was an MMA instructor, so it's not like he could not have beat me up, and not that he did not many times, but it was just, at that point I was ready.
So you throw his stuff out, you're done, and I'm assuming divorce is like the next step after that?
Yes. Well, it's really interesting because I actually I really thought that I was going to be able, the plan was to bring my ex-husband up on charges. I wanted him to pay for what he did.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for tuning in for part 1 of Keena's story. Stay tuned for part 2.